Are you addicted to chasing goals or are you addicted to chasing rewards? Because those are two very different things. And oftentimes we think we're addicted to goals, but what it turns out to be is we're actually addicted to rewards. You know, when you open up your phone and it dings because you got a new thing going on social media, and all of a sudden we get excited and fired up about it? Or how about when you get to check something off your to do list? Or maybe you reach a milestone and you get some sort of reward or credit for that, right? We all love those things. Now, those may or may not help us get towards our goals, but they're certainly not accomplishing our long term goal. So, why is it? Why does this happen? Why are rewards, why do they get us so fired up? Well, it all boils down to this thing called dopamine. Now, dopamine is not inherently a bad thing. There's a lot of good parts of dopamine, but that's for a lesson down the road. We're going to talk about how dopamine can actually sabotage us. So, what is dopamine? Well, dopamine is a chemical that keeps us hooked on instant gratification, even when it can derail our long term success. We're more caring about what happens in that moment, and we sometimes forget about the long term goals. So, in this video, we're going to dive lightly into the science behind dopamine and how we can get addicted to the dopamine loop, how it can actually sabotage our progress, but most importantly, how do we break free from that trap? How do we escape dopamine's negative effects? Again, because there are positive effects to dopamine. So let's learn how to stop chasing these quick fixes, these short-term rewards, this instant gratification, and learn how to build habits for sustainable long-term success that align with accomplishing our goals.
I have a question. Have you ever wondered why it's so tiny to get first? And maybe they got a different job. I mean, oh no! She put the drug that the really went exactly what you were doing. But it can actually get out of your attention. Chris will tell you how. Take it away, Chris.
The dopamine habit loop. James Clear explains it best in his book Atomic Habits, right? He talks about the 4 stages of this dopamine loop. It's cue, craving, response, reward, right? And because dopamine is a real chemical that provides us with this gratification, satisfaction, this great feeling, it's what drives this whole thing. So think about this. Is social media generally the best way to accomplish your long-term goals? No, right? It tends to be a distraction. Not that it's not part of a lot of business models for marketing purposes, but it's something that tends to be this big distraction, right? But, all of a sudden our phone dings. That's the cue, right? And that leads to the craving. We really want to go check our phone. So what's the response? We go and we spend too much time on social media. It takes away from what we're currently doing to accomplish our long-term goals, but there's a reward, and that reward is dopamine. We feel good that 6 people just liked our post, right? So you can see where that feels good in the moment. It's chemically driven, so it's not just your own discipline or lack of willpower. You feel a chemical release that makes you feel good about it. But doing that too often does what to your long-term goals? It derails them. So what we need to figure out is how do we break this dopamine loop? The cue, craving, response, and reward. So why are we addicted like this? Well, it's the brain's reward system, right? That's what dopamine does. But the problem is, as we mentioned before, it tends to be those short-term things. I'll give you an example. Every Friday, a lot of people like to go to happy hour, right? So Friday, as soon as the end of the workday happens, that's your cue that it's time to go to happy hour, right? So the cue is there, the cravings go to happy hour, the response is go to happy hour, and you drink and you have fun, and the reward is you feel good at the moment, right? But then you missed out on probably some stuff you needed to do that night that would have helped you achieve your long-term goals. And then maybe you feel a little sluggish the next day because you had one too many adult beverages. So that derails you from accomplishing your goals. Now, I'm not frowning upon happy hours. Serenity teaches a lot about the importance of friendship, social interaction, detaching, and getting outside of just your work and just your goals, because that's super important. But it's just an example of another habit loop that we would need to figure out a way to break, because it's going to derail us on our long-term goal, right? That's a short-term reward. It feels good in the moment, but it does nothing to help our long-term success. Matter of fact, it might actually hurt it. But small achievements, they trigger these dopamine spikes that our body gets used to, our body wants to, we start to hear the cue, we crave it, all that loop, and it becomes this cycle of goal chasing, but without any real fulfillment because it's not really a goal, it's just a reward. And those rewards, those instant gratifications come with a cost, right? Social media, eating bad food when we're trying to be healthy, drinking too much, drugs, all those things, right, have a short-term satisfaction because they feel good in the moment, and that is immediate gratification. That's that release of dopamine. Sometimes it's impulsive shopping, right? Those are common forms of that instant gratification, but none of those help us with our long-term goals. That short-term pleasure hurts our long-term success. So being aware of it and knowing we have to address it is crucial in our approach to accomplishing our goals, right? But these are real life examples of how chasing that dopamine, it can derail your financial success, your physical success, your emotional goals, all of those things. Dopamine can be very dangerous. So knowing all of this, how do we break free from the dopamine trap? Right? Because again, it's not just your discipline, it's not just your willpower. These are chemical reactions that drive our behaviors. It's a thing that happens, it's physiology. But it's important that we figure out ways to break through it. So first of all, we've got to recognize and disrupt these daily habits, right? These unhealthy habits. So if we go back to the phone for an example, how do we disrupt getting compulsive and that reward, that dopamine to check our social media when we shouldn't, or spending too much time there, right? We've got to figure out how to delay gratification with small intentional actions, right? So what does that look like in practice? Well, with that particular social media example, it's turn off notifications. It's don't have your phone around when you're supposed to be working on your long-term goals. And there's research that shows, what everybody does now is they just put their phone face down. Well, guess what? If that phone is there, it's still distracting you. It's still a cue. Put it away, put it in your backpack, put it in your desk drawer so it's not even there to be remotely a cue. That's the first way of breaking that habit loop for that particular example. But again, we want to be able to, bigger picture, shift from worrying about immediate gratification, those immediate rewards, and we got to think about the long-term goal and shift our focus to that. And again, that's not only conscious shift of focus, it's also trying to not create those dopamine effects from those small habits and that instant gratification. So ultimately, it comes down to building a dopamine resistant mindset, right? Easier said than done, but the good news is with practice and intentionality, we can do it. So what you want to do is, we know that that reward system works, the dopamine, the cue, the craving, the response, the reward, that works, right? It works on us, and we're all guilty of it in certain ways in the negative aspects. Well, when you think of it in a positive aspect, how can we tie that same kind of pattern to long-term goals that are meaningful to what we're trying to accomplish? So we've got to figure out a reward system that rewards us taking the right steps to accomplish those long-term goals. We need to prioritize habits that yield success over the quick fixes. Again, easier said than done, but you can do it with intentionality and practice. Using things like reflection and journaling to track progress and celebrate delayed gratification, right? So we actually want to reward ourselves for not rewarding ourselves through immediate, instantaneous gratification. And this all ties into practical strategies for discipline and focus, right? That habit loop tends to detract from our focus. So we need to figure out how we have the discipline to stay focused. Now, the biggest misconception with discipline is that it's all about willpower. It's all about, can you stick to it? Can you do it, right? And while there's a piece to that, the other piece is change your environment. If you want to avoid the distractions, we used the thing earlier about the phones, turn off your notifications. Don't have your phone around. If you want to eat healthier, right, then don't have bad food in the house, because bad food, it's the cue. All of a sudden you have a cue, you see the cookies on the counter, you crave them, you eat them, your response is, I feel good in the moment, but you've completely derailed your physical fitness goals, right? So don't have bad food in the house. If it is too many happy hours, what can you schedule and plan instead of happy hour so you literally can't go to happy hour, right? Schedule a golf lesson. Right? Because then I can't go to happy hour because I actually have this lesson, rather than just don't go, I'm not going to go, because discipline and willpower are diminishing resources. We tend to be more disciplined and have more willpower in the morning. As the day goes on, we get stressed, we get cranky, we get tired, we start to lose those, and those fade. So if you rely solely on those, you're never going to break that habit loop, right? So figure out key strategies to change your environment. Use time blocking to focus on deep work where there are no distractions. One thing Seren is really big on is developing a solid morning routine that is all tied to your long-term goals rather than instant gratification. So dopamine, it's not an inherently bad thing, but it can be bad because it can stick us in this dopamine loop where we get stuck in the cue, craving, response, reward. And oftentimes that's bad things. It's immediate gratification that keeps us from accomplishing our long-term goals. Again, we're settling for short-term pleasure and we're sacrificing our long-term goals. And because of the dopamine, half the time we don't even realize it in the moment. But ultimately, it boils down to breaking this loop and making sure that our behaviors match our priorities. And if that short-term habit loop is a behavior that doesn't match your long-term priority, that's what we need to work on. So how do we do it? Well, we want you to start small. Disrupt one bad habit loop today and shift your focus to what truly matters. So listen, discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. And it's those of us that choose what we want most that can avoid what we want now that are going to be the most successful. If you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, and I'm sure that you did, make sure you like it, share it, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel.